We begin with a Fox News alert. Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee are drafting a contempt of Congress resolution against FBI Director Christopher Wray and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. The committee chairman says they are stonewalling on information about an FBI official's role in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. The agencies have until the end of today to turn over all requested material, or the contempt resolution will be triggered and presented next month. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here today, host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy herself. Former national security staffer under Presidents Bush and Obama, Jillian Turner. Former deputy spokesperson for the State Department, Marie Harf. Today's guy in the middle. Former U.S. ambassador to the UN and Fox News contributor John Bolton is outnumbered, although he tells us often that he doesn't feel that way.
Exactly. It's great to be here again.
Happy Monday.
And your new digs.
I know, right?
He fights ninjas in the alley for practice.
I know, I've seen him.
This will be a walk in the park.
Yeah. All right. Well, good to have you. Let's get to it. House Intel Chairman Devin Nunes says the FBI Director and Deputy Attorney General are stonewalling on information about an FBI official who played a role in the Hillary Clinton email probe. The Justice Department says it is complying and will continue to do so. But Republicans want to know more about that FBI official after the New York Times and Washington Post reported special counsel Robert Mueller removed him from his team after it came to light that official was sending anti-Trump text messages while investigating Hillary Clinton's email use. The DOJ's Inspector General is already looking into how he handled the Clinton email probe. He happens to be the one who did the interview with Clinton back in July, just 3 days before then FBI Director James Comey announced he was not recommending any charges against Hillary Clinton. President Trump suggested this morning there's a double standard. The latest revelations are raising questions for several lawmakers, including Republican Congressman Peter King of New York.
This raises very real questions about the Hillary Clinton investigation. Somebody who is so high up on it in that investigation, who was so much involved in this final statement and making decisions, the fact that he was so anti-Trump and that this is right in the middle of a presidential campaign, it really puts a whole shadow over the findings of that investigation and the decision that was made, why they are focusing on intent when intent is not required.
He's talking about a shadow over the whole investigation. What do you think?
Well, I think there are a lot of things going on in this, and part of it is a legitimate question of separation of powers. I mean, I speak as a Department of Justice alumnus, and there is something, I think, illegitimate in Congress getting involved in the specifics of criminal investigations, particularly while they're ongoing. There's more to be said once an investigation is concluded, but here the FBI agent in question is now the subject of a Department of Justice Inspector General investigation. It'd be one thing to go after the Hillary Clinton email issue, which is concluded, quite something else to look into Mueller's investigation of the administration. Although being opposed to the independent counsel concept in principle, I would like to see that shut down as soon as possible.
One quick follow-up. Do these things start to kind of negate one another? What we saw with General Flynn on Friday and all of the deal that he made, is it possible that any of this had to do with that? I mean, finding out that there's a guy who's anti-Trump inside the FBI?
Well, I think this is a serious potential problem for the FBI, though. When you put as much power as we do in the hands of the FBI, federal prosecutors, it has to be exercised on a very careful basis. And these kinds of political statements call into question just how truly nonpartisan objective Comey's investigation was. I think it's part of a bigger problem of criminalizing American politics. I think we're very much at risk of descending into third worldism, where each new administration puts its predecessor in jail. That's not something we should be doing, but we're getting very close to it because the lack of faith in our institutions, like the FBI, like the Justice Department, is being called into question.
Yeah, it figuratively or literally puts them in jail. I mean, it can't just be the conversation and the distraction. Marie?
I think the ambassador makes some really good points. And to your question, Harris, the Flynn guilty plea and the ongoing Mueller investigation, I do view as separate. The Inspector General of DOJ is looking into this FBI agent. They will, issue a report after they've done an investigation. It seems to me like members of Congress should wait until the IG looks into this, not threaten this contempt citation, which seems to me to be a little bit of grandstanding. The FBI seems to be taking this seriously and looking at this agent. Going back to the Hillary Clinton investigation, though, multiple people worked on that. People can disagree with the outcome, but I don't think it's fair to say that he necessarily, this
yeah,
one
but he
agent
did the interview with Hillary Clinton.
I'm
3
sure
days
a
before
number
the
of people were in that interview.
And what
I'm
we
sure it
also
was more
know
than
is
just
that
him.
the former FBI director had written, you know, maybe not his conclusion, but his thoughts on it.
That's not why she was in
Okay,
charge, though.
But
it doesn't look good.
And let's look at the
I'm not saying
influence.
it's why, but it's in the constellation of events.
But let's look at the influence that one person can have on an investigation like this. The agent that we're talking about, he was a lead investigator. He's also someone that, you know, and now there are questions about how we know these things and how much is the government spying on itself. But also some of these texts that went back and forth that were anti-Trump from this agent and his mistress, who also worked at the FBI.
And because there was a central element to this investigation of email that this particular individual was at the center of, which is there a requirement for criminal intent in the handling of the emails? And I think it's clear that gross negligence was sufficient. This guy had concluded it wasn't and persuaded Comey of it.
But didn't DOJ
let's let Jillian jump in
Didn't
here.
the FBI then give it to DOJ attorneys to look at that, though?
Okay,
Isn't that part of the process?
Both stories that we're talking about, the contempt story
Right.
and the FBI agent who's potentially sort of political here, I see them as both kind of emanating from the same root cause, which is, I'm not saying this is President Trump's fault, but President Trump's feud with the intelligence community that has been raging since the campaign, that's the fallout we're seeing now. And what I fear is that in this situation, everybody loses because you lose everybody loses trust in the institutions. The FBI and the intelligence community feel resentful of the president. That is an ugly
I would
situation
argue
for
this,
everybody.
though, and from what the president said this morning, the FBI may be losing more than anybody. This is what the president tweeted. And maybe people see it this way. After years of Comey, meaning the former FBI director, James Comey, with the phony and dishonest Clinton investigation and more, running the FBI, its reputation is in tatters, worst in history. But we fear not, we will bring it back to greatness. I mean,
But the president has hurt their reputation more than anybody else, I would argue.
All right, but
I'm not saying
just
that
very
is
quickly, though. I mean,
unwarranted,
and to
but-
your point, I don't think it's a politicization, meaning like Republican versus Democrat. I mean, that's happening in Congress. That is essentially a given. Even when you talk about grandstanding, there may be grandstanding, but at the same time, let's have transparency. Let's see the documents. We've seen so much. Show us the rest of it. That's number one. But I also think it's about the deep state protecting itself. It's about the FBI agents who are not necessarily Democrat or Republican, but they are protecting. There are good agents there. And every time something like this happens, their hard work is undermined when you see that one person may have had a political axe to grind.
Yeah.
And
But
it
that
makes
goes
it
back to what Ambassador Bolton was saying, which is, are these folks, these civilians, not allowed to have personal, private
Yes.
political
fortunately, we
opinion?
have Ambassador Bolton here.
Yeah, I think the person who has harmed the FBI the most is James Comey. I think the way he conducted the Clinton email investigation, and I don't mean his legal conclusion, which was bad, I think the way he handled it publicly for the greater glory of James Comey was a problem. He never should have had the summer press conference where he said she's not going to be charged, but she was sloppy. He then never should have had the November letter
Absolutely.
everything he did on that investigation called the integrity of the FBI into question.
Okay,
well,
He's
I
the
see
one.
you
very,
nodding,
very
Marie.
quickly, though.
I agree.
Agreeing.
I agree with you about special counsel. And if we're not going to have special counsel and if we're not going to reach some objective outside source, then these institutions have to police themselves better. They have to do a better job of self-investigation. And so far, we're not seeing it. And that, to Harris's point, undermines the public trust in the FBI and the intelligence community in general.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the public sees that politicians, no matter how high or where they are on the hierarchy, are going to be political beings. What they expect is for the FBI not to be. And so this brings into question again, you know, more than 2 times in a year, one with the former director and now with the investigation and this person who's involved in it, or was, is this also as political as anything else? And that's what drives the distrust. Glad you're here. Let's move on. Just about a week before the Alabama special Senate election, Republican leader Mitch McConnell dropped his opposition to that GOP candidate, Roy Moore. The president tweeting his outright support for the controversial candidate. Polls showing it is neck and neck in Alabama. what a more victory would mean for Republicans. And after a historic Senate vote on tax reform, Republicans are now working to get a bill to the president's desk by Christmas. Democrats all in on trashing the tax plan. Whether it's a good strategy, we'll talk about it. Stay close.
This is a Fox News alert. Republicans in the House and Senate to start reconciling their tax plans tonight. The Senate passed its version early Saturday morning, and there are some unresolved differences. But the influential head of the conservative Republican Study Committee, Senator John Barrasso, is very confident that they will get one bill to the president's desk.
There's going to be a conference committee. The members from the House and the Senate will get together to look for the best solutions, but we're not that far apart. Fundamentally, for the American public, we double the standard deductions, double the child tax credits. We lower the rates. And in terms of investing in America and in an American-first economy, we lower tax rates for Main Street businesses all across the country, as well as corporations, to make us much more competitive internationally.
All right, how will they bridge those gaps? Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel joins us live from the Hill. Mike?
Kennedy, good afternoon. Another Senate Republican sounds hopeful that it won't be that difficult to finish the job on tax reform.
We moved the Senate bill to look a little bit more like the House bill so we could iron out differences, I think, in an easy fashion. Some of the major differences are pretty much gone.
Let's take a look at some of the key differences between the two bills. First, let's look at the House proposal. It would preserve the Affordable Care Act individual mandate. It makes permanent corporate and individual tax rates, and the estate tax will be eliminated in 2024. The Senate plan repeals the Affordable Care Act individual mandate. The individual cuts expire in 2025. The corporate rate is permanent, and the estate tax is limited, not repealed entirely. The House Majority Leader is expressing support for at least one component of that Senate plan, what it does to the Obamacare individual mandate.
I think that's very positive. I mean, remember what that is. That punishes people for not buying something they don't want. So why would you tax them on that? And that's been able to pass the Senate.
On the other side, one senator notes the historic nature of what transpired late night Friday night in the Senate chamber, because you don't often vote to address the tax code.
We've now made a 30-year decision. This may be the most important vote any of us take in our career, because this isn't the reauthorization of the FAA or even the Farm Bill. This is something that's going to affect every American, every business, the whole economy for decades.
The House is due to vote this evening to go to conference. Then we will see just how quickly lawmakers in the House and Senate can work out those differences to put that bill on the president's desk. Kennedy?
Very good, Mike. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Meantime, Democrats are united in opposition to the tax overhaul. Senator Bernie Sanders calling the Republican plan class warfare and essentially calling the president a liar.
President Trump's lies continue. Hey, I'm rich, but I got to tell you, this tax bill is not for the wealthy. It is for the middle class. That is a blatant lie.
Wow, I thought that was the president talking. What a great impression. Democrat John Tester in a Twitter rant gone viral, blasting the GOP process on the bill and saying it will hurt regular Americans. Watch.
Take a look at this, folks. This is your government at work. Here's the bill as it's written. Here's the modifications that are in it. I can read one word. It's called add this language. This is unbelievable. We're doing massive tax reform on an absolute incredible timeline. This is going to affect everybody in this country. It's going to shift money from middle-class families to the rich.
Very angry. But President Trump, with this warning as he touts his party's successful Senate vote, with no thanks to Democrats.
Out of 52 Republican senators, 51 voted, and we ended up doing it, and we didn't need our great vice president to break the tie. We got no Democrat help, and I think that's going to cost them very big in the election, because basically they voted against tax cuts. And I don't think politically it's good to vote against tax cuts.
All right, that's what the president is banking on. Ambassador, is he right? Well, is he right? Will tax cuts be the great savior of this fractured party?
Well, I think you can say this with complete certainty. If this bill doesn't get enacted and signed into law, Republicans are toast in November of next year. So adoption of this legislation is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for Republican success. I happen to think it's a pretty good bill. I'm optimistic they're going to reach agreement between the House and the Senate versions. And I think it will have a positive impact on the economy. And as far as the process points that the Democrats have raised, life is hard and too bad. So if people look at the effect of the tax bill rather than the way it was legislated, like so much other legislation, I think it will be positive for the economy and positive politically.
Well, Harris, I mean, he's absolutely right, because the economy is going in the right direction right now. And the president maybe doesn't talk about it enough, but with Wall Street and unemployment numbers and GDP growth.
Let me stop you right there.
That's a
Wall
good basis.
Street isn't telling me that the economy is going well for the people on Main Street. It never has. In fact, I don't even think that's part of the argument for Republicans, so I think it's kind of smart that they haven't leaned in on the 65 times that the Dow has broken the record or something like that, or closed outside of territory we've seen before. So, I mean,
Except
I think
for
it's
working
important.
people who have 401k plans and other savings in the market.
To a certain degree, yes. But what really measures that is what they feel in their paychecks. And so if the first $24,000 is without tax, people will feel that. If SALT goes away, which has been around since 1914, people will feel that too. And what it may feel like to them is that there was a movement of that money, and not all those people are, to quote one of our leaders today, I can't remember who said this, are spending it on booze and women, not with regard to the death tax. Not everybody who's in that earning category is actually taking it and wanting to put it anywhere other than back into the economy, those salts that they preserve. So, I mean, there are some shifts of money here that do require some explanation. But if the president moves on the corporate tax rate, that's going to be a discussion.
The fundamental point is substantial cuts in the corporate tax rate that make the United States far more competitive internationally, and a point that's not often discussed, making an effective tax rate to allow American corporations to bring back to this country something like $3 to $4 trillion of foreign earnings that have been over there. Now, not every company will invest those, but they may clear up their balance sheets, they may return money to their investors. All of this is going to have a positive impact. The problem for the Republicans was they should have passed this in March.
Yes, they should have put this first on the docket.
But the problem extends beyond the differences between the House and Senate versions of the bill.
They're not as massive as they were with the health care bill.
Correct, and Senator Barrasso is right in that respect. But as Ambassador Bolton pointed out, the heart and soul of the Senate's version of this bill is this corporate tax rate reduction from 35 to 20%. And they spent a great deal of time haggling over every percentage point on that scale. And then President Trump went out on Saturday and said to reporters, he said, business tax all the way down from 35 to 20. It could be 22 when it all comes out, but it could also be 20. We'll see what ultimately shakes out.
Marie, I don't want to bring Marie in.
No, but it's not just a difference of 2 percentage points. Economists have now pointed out that that would make a difference of about $200 billion of additional revenue.
Or they could,
so it sounds like the president's not really committed to the Senate Republicans' version of this bill. To me, that's a bigger problem.
Will they get this bill to the president's desk, Marie?
I think they'll get a version of it. I'm not sure if it'll be by Christmas. They have to keep the government open this week. It shuts down on Friday. If they don't, they have a lot of other business. And the gulfs, I still think, are pretty wide.
All right.
Well, then you kick it to 2019 if you don't get it done before the end of the year.
They'll get it done before the end of the year.
Well, we'll see. We're going to start taking bets here in the Outnumbered casino.
Ambassador, last word.
President Trump stepping up his battle with the mainstream media. He said some Americans could sue ABC News after Brian Ross's false report on Michael Flynn briefly sent markets into a tailspin Friday. Plus, a growing war of words on Capitol Hill over what former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn may know and whether the White House should be concerned about where the Russia investigations are leading. We'll debate that from the couch in moments. Stay right here.
A lot of new reaction to tell you about to former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's plea deal and what it could mean for the White House. The top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee says it shows General Flynn did not act alone.
He wasn't acting as a rogue agent, that in fact, he was acting with the knowledge and at the direction of people who were senior members of the transition team. It indicates, to me at least, that this is not the end of it by any means.
But George W. Bush's former Attorney General Michael Mukasey says the deal suggests the opposite of that.
What I made of it is that a lot of the heavy breathing and a lot of the speculation is completely unwarranted. That plea agreement does not, to me, indicate that there's very much else there.
Meanwhile, President Trump tweeted this: "I had to fire General Flynn because he lied to the vice president and the FBI. He has pled guilty to those lies. It is a shame because his actions during the transition were lawful. There was nothing to hide." And now Senator Dianne Feinstein of California says the Judiciary Committee is getting a closer look to building a case against President Trump over Russia. Watch.
I think what we're beginning to see is the putting together of a case of obstruction of justice. I think we see this in the indictments, the 4 indictments and pleas that have just taken place, in some of the comments that are being made. I see it most importantly in what happened with the firing of Director Comey. And it is my belief that that is directly because he did not agree to lift the cloud of the Russia investigation. That's obstruction of justice.
Do you agree with that?
Look, this shows what's fundamentally wrong with the whole concept of these independent counsels. We have yet to hear a shred of evidence of any illegal action involving the Trump campaign and the government of Russia. But what we have now are pleas to lying to the FBI by 2 people, Flynn and campaign staffer. We have Paul Manafort indicted for crimes unrelated to the investigation. So here's the critical fact. The only crimes that are out there came because of the investigation. That is to say, but for the investigation, these crimes would not have existed. So if this is, you're seeing a series of potential lying to the FBI, perjury, subornation of perjury, destruction or altering of evidence, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to obstruct justice. You could be indicted on all of those crimes if the FBI were investigating your Christmas list. That is something fundamentally wrong and goes to the point we discussed earlier about the criminalization of politics. This is very dangerous.
Can I just talk about kind of the confliction, if you will, of facts with Dianne Feinstein? I mean, at first, Democrats wanted Comey out. They were angry with the whole situation over Hillary Clinton and oh, we think we have more emails. Oh, yes, we do, right before, practically on the eve of the election, and how that might have damaged her and how upset the Hillary Clinton campaign was going on. So I think it's a little disingenuous when they beat the Bushes about, well, I'm angry because they fired James Comey, or that was obstruction of justice.
The only thing that would have happened if Hillary Clinton were elected president is James Comey would have been fired much, much sooner.
Yes. On January the 20th, which is when Trump should have fired him.
And Democrats would have cheered. My problem with Dianne Feinstein's interview this Sunday was she was trying to connect these dots between the indictments that we've seen and presidential obstruction of justice. And she also said, the mood in the White House, and I'm sorry, I don't know if she took a weekend seminar in fortune telling, but so far it's very amateurish. And, you can't have someone in power who's going to obstruct justice or misuse the power of the office. They haven't proven that President Trump has done that. And that's a very, very serious charge that will rip the country apart at the seams, and we haven't seen that yet. Democrats have to stop acting as though we have.
Well, the other issue here, too, Jillian, is that by firing James Comey, that's how we got special counsel Robert Mueller. And the last I checked, the Democrats were happy because they thought that this guy was the guy who could get to the truth.
Well, look, so to me, all this stuff, what we know in the investigation right now is that General Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. So the next question, it becomes, well, what did he lie about? And we now know that he lied about his interactions with the Russian government. That is the crux of the problem. We know that there's 2 cruxes. Let me adjust what I said. There's the fact that he lied, but then there's also what he lied about. And the content of the conversations that he had with the Russian government is what he lied about. I think that's equally important because, and I think President Trump is saying that too in his tweet. He's saying, I had to fire him because he lied to the vice president. What we don't know is if he lied to the president. And that will come out in the course of the investigation. We don't know whether what he said to the Russian ambassador was directed by anyone or came from him just taking national security into his own hands as a member of the family.
But wouldn't any other administration?
Look, we know what he said to the Russians. Take the worst case. He said, for God's sakes, don't do anything. We're going to lift the sanctions that Obama imposed on you. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that.
I totally agree.
The new incoming administration is perfectly entitled to tell any foreign
But I'm not saying that I think that would be wrong. I'm saying if the president didn't direct him to do that.
Why did he lie? Why did he lie?
That's a great question.
Because well, to me, it's incomprehensible. But if there is an explanation, it's because it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing because of all the pressure.
Again, like you said earlier, life is hard.
Yeah, but that's not criminal. And
well, lying to the FBI is criminal.
But it's only because of the investigation. In other words,
he shouldn't have lied.
Of course he shouldn't have lied. But here you've created an independent counsel utterly out of control.
But Ambassador Bolton, what if he also lied to the president? That's my point.
Or what if he did it and the president didn't direct him?
We already know that he lied to the vice president.
What if every administration was going to have any conversation with the Russian government about fighting ISIS?
The real question is, what is the plea deal? Why did they give him a deal?
Is there a special diplomatic status with the Russian government that no one from the United States could speak with them?
They wouldn't have given him that deal
because
if he didn't have something to offer.
They're moving to an obstruction.
I don't know, man. That's like saying, we trust us. There's WMD there, so we're going to go ahead and invade Iraq.
There's no. Let's come back to that. There's no Russia crime here. They think there's an obstruction crime.
On that.
Yeah, I think Dianne Feinstein is right, and this whole thing is utter hot air.
Well, speaking of hot air, President Trump blasting ABC News after the network suspended its chief investigative reporter Brian Ross for 4 weeks. Ross erroneously reporting on Friday that former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn would testify that then-candidate Trump told staffers to make contact with Russian officials. But it was actually when Trump was president-elect. There is a difference there. President Trump tweeting, quote, people who lost money when the stock market went down 350 points based on the false and dishonest reporting of Brian Ross of ABC News should consider hiring a lawyer and suing ABC for the damages this bad reporting has caused, many millions of dollars. Wow. Meanwhile, after the network was forced to issue a correction, ABC News saying in part they, quote, deeply regret and apologize, unquote, for the error and that the report had not been, quote, fully vetted through our editorial standards process.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So when you basically through your erroneous reporting take down the stock market for just a minute, I mean, it didn't take long. It bounced back. We figured, it came back. When you disparage the president, sitting president, not then candidate, nothing like that, but as president in your reporting and get it wrong, how do they come up with 4 weeks without pay? Like, is that
you've never done that, Harris? Come on.
He gets December off, guys.
No, but my point is, how do they come up with the, and not funny, how do they come up with this exact list of repercussions for him? Why not a firing? Why not something else? Why not?
Yeah. Look, there are too many reporters who are lazy, sloppy. They don't care about whether they get the facts right. Just speaking for the side of the couch that's been in the government, how many stories have we seen that involved us or issues we're dealing with that are just flatly wrong? Forget whether it's left or right, Republican or Democrat. There are too many reporters who don't do their jobs. This guy is the first in a long time that I'm aware of who's gotten some penalty for it. The only thing I see wrong with it is he just should have been fired.
You know what, though, and I will say this, Marie, there were reporters from several news organizations who jumped on him immediately, and not necessarily conservative editorialists, but objective journalists who see this as reprehensible.
And what it does is it hurts the journalists who do a good job, right? There are journalists every day across media outlets who are trying to get the truth, who are trying to do good work, and when there's someone like this, it gives President Trump and people who don't like them, or who are inclined to not trust the media, it gives them a really powerful data point, which hurts legitimate journalists when they are trying to do their jobs.
Or it just allows them to say this is wrong. I mean, let's even take the game of scoring points on it. It was wrong. And I brought up Dan Rather and the producer with the reporting. You remember what happened back then with former President Bush?
When some reporter says something about you that's wrong, you never get to strike back effectively.
No, they have more ink than you do.
Because you're in the government, and they just skip away and never bear the consequences of it. This guy should bear some consequences, big time.
Well, he is. It's 4 weeks without pay. Again, that's a very arbitrary thing. I wonder where that comes from.
Yeah.
He gets the holidays off.
Yeah. How exciting. You know who doesn't? Voters in Alabama. New polls showing the Alabama Senate race neck and neck with just 8 days to go until voters head to the polls. Can embattled Republican candidate Roy Moore pull off a victory? And what could this race mean for the president's agenda? Plus, House investigators making headway in their search for answers on whether the Obama administration used that unverified anti-Trump dossier to justify surveillance on the Trump campaign. We have details on all of that next.
House investigators taking a huge step towards answering serious questions about that anti-Trump dossier funded by the Clinton campaign and the DNC. One of the biggest outstanding issues, was it unverified and largely debunked? Was it a piece of opposition research used to justify then surveillance of the Trump campaign by the Obama administration? Now the Justice Department is permitting the House Intelligence Committee to interview the FBI official who worked with Christopher Steele, the British spy behind the dossier. Ambassador, this is definitely in your wheelhouse in terms of, well, what are we looking at here? You got a British spy and some information floating out there about a guy running for president, and maybe it was used against him.
Well, there's a lot here. Obviously, we still don't understand. Hopefully, this interview will help cut through it. But you have to ask yourself, what did the FBI think it was doing when this dossier rolled in? And if it was, in fact, used as the basis of a FISA court application, I think the FISA court is going to go ballistic because this really compromises its process here as well. And look, it's part of the larger concern about what the FBI under James Comey was doing. So once again, because of the damage that's been done overall to the FBI's credibility, we need to know about this.
Because look at all the other things that we know this week about something going on in the FBI. You had at least one anti-Trump person on important investigations within that agency, which isn't necessarily to conflate these issues, but it's all around it, Marie.
Well, I think the FISA court takes its obligations very seriously when it either says yes or no to an application to put surveillance on an American citizen.
But we don't know that because there's no transparency at all whatsoever.
Well, I think everything I've ever heard and my experience, limited in government, but, you know, with the FISA court, was that they take that job very seriously. I agree with the ambassador. Let's get some more information. We don't know all the facts here. We'll see what the outcome of that is. My suspicion is that the FISA court application, if there was one, and I don't know that there was one, if there was one, contained a lot of information from a lot of different sources and a lot of different places. I would be shocked if they relied solely on this to get a FISA warrant, and if, in fact, the court said yes.
It almost defies belief that that scenario could take place.
I agree.
And put it this way, if the dossier that was provided to the FBI ultimately proved to be some type of source material that they used in order to get a FISA warrant, every word, every letter of that dossier would have been verified before they moved forward.
And you know that because and I want to quote both of you, because they take it seriously?
No,
that's how we know that?
No, it's because how they're structured.
Because you don't know how they're structured. That's the problem. They could have been spying because a lot of us have been spying and we have no idea. And why was Christopher Steele still working with the FBI if the job is taken so seriously and there's so much transparency?
Because maybe some of it is true.
Ambassador?
And maybe some of it is not. So what's the ratio?
I want the ambassador.
Your voice sounds just like Kennedy's.
I've actually signed FISA applications.
There you go.
There you go. They're this thick. Normally. And it is true that there's a verification process. But that's why the role of this particular dossier is so important, because it clearly was not verified. And therefore, if at somebody's direction it was put into a FISA application and played any role in it, I think it compromises that application. And this is something that the FISA court has to respond to, and the Justice Department does, because it's ultimately responsible. This is not an FBI matter. This is something Jeff Sessions personally should take an interest in.
Can he do that, though?
Absolutely. This goes
given
to the
his
integrity
recusal, can he do that?
What goes to his integrity, the lawyers who appear before the FISA court, and that affects everything that will happen for him for the next 3 years.
All right. The president throwing his support behind embattled Alabama GOP Senate candidate, Judge Roy Moore. He says Republicans need him for their agenda. The race is neck and neck as voters head to the polls in little more than a week. Can Moore win? And what would it mean for Republicans? Stay close.